listening to a podcast from The Word.
This Word in Your Ear is brought to you thanks to NordVPN. And NordVPN, just remind me once more, Mark, because it often slips my mind what the V, the P, and the N actually stand for.
Whereas it never slips mine. It's Virtual Private Network, David.
Just say it
Make
once
a note of
more.
that. Virtual Private Network.
Maybe I won't have to ask you in future. Maybe you finally dinned it into me.
Yeah.
And you probably also know that it's a way to keep your data safe on the internet whenever you're logging in, either at home or abroad. A VPN can protect your identity and encrypts your data so that nobody can steal your identity. And at the same time, it gives you access to the internet via servers in more than 50, count them, 50 different countries. This means you can often sidestep region restrictions and stream movies and TV programs from all around the world. Talking of TV programs from all around the world, have you seen Mr. In Between?
No. Fill me in.
Let me recommend it to you. It describes itself as a dark comedy. And if you can imagine a cross between, Saxondale, the thing where Steve Coogan played a former roadie who had anger issues. It's a cross between that and, I don't know, Reservoir Dogs or something. It's an Australian production. And starring this guy who also wrote it, called Scott Ryan, who's just really remarkable central figure. You can't take your eyes off him because he's capable of enormous acts of compassion and generosity to his nearest and dearest, and acts of utterly repellent violence against people who he's engaged to rub out. And it
sounds gripping.
It's very interesting in the sense that I often find myself looking at movies and going, why do actors nowadays just love playing kind of gangsters and violent parts, when clearly their personal experience of violence is, purely theoretical? They haven't fought in a war or anything. None of these actors have been in a punch-up in a pub or anything like that. None of them have been anywhere near any football violence or anything. But they play this kind of thing. Whereas this guy, Scott Ryan, you look at him and think, he could do anything. He really could do anything. You can't take your eyes off him. So that's my personal recommendation.
So he's utterly convincing as a kind of gangster son.
Utterly convincing. You think, oh my God, what's he going to do? Is he going to hug me or is he going to,
knife me?
Absolutely. You would not know because he's utterly charming. Anyway, so you can take advantage of a deal where you can try NordVPN by going to nordvpn.com, your ear, or just use the code your ear to get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan and 1 additional month for free, and also a bonus gift. So it's risk-free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee. Full details in the show notes below.
The Word Podcast. Prime cuts of popular culture served fresh each week.
Do you know what we were doing 20 years ago tonight, Mark? I'm pretty sure you were there.
Oh, my God. What are we, 20? So
and I'll tell you where it was. We were at the Shepherd's Bush Empire.
Oh, Dixie Chicks? No.
The Dixie Chicks.
Oh, my goodness.
It was 20 years ago tonight.
Yes, it was.
We went along out of curiosity to see the Dixie Chicks, who were kind of the hot new thing in pop country at the time.
And they made a off-the-cuff remark.
The slightest remark about George Bush. He came from Texas and they came from Texas.
They just wanted to make it clear they were a bit embarrassed.
They weren't particularly proud. It was so off the cuff. There was nobody in the room went, ooh, they've gone a bit far.
And they would never have done that on home turf. They just did it because they were in the Shepherd's Bush Empire.
I was reading about a thing about it today. They're saying it was the beginning of cancel culture.
Yeah, it was. It was. Absolutely.
Enough. The idea that your career could be absolutely torpedoed by one chance meant nothing.
They had to go away and eat the most enormous quantities of humble pie.
Unbelievable.
They came back. Do you remember they appeared on the cover of, was it
Entertainment Weekly?
Entertainment Weekly.
With it naked
and painted with slogans.
Slogans all over them. So that
ultimately changed their name also to just the Chicks, but that was a different thing. But I mean, that's just part of it. I can't believe they're still going, actually, after all we've been. But that was the first time I can remember somebody's name just being completely decimated overnight.
Yeah, it just became mud. Whereas now, the world we live in, it happens just about twice a week, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know, it's just absolutely extraordinary. How are we to know that we were sitting there at the birth of a new cultural poison, I suppose.
Completely.
But we were.
I feel great sympathy for them.
20 years ago tonight.
This is a junction in the word podcast. It separates that bit from this next bit.
So did you read the other day that Gary Rossington of Lynyrd Skynyrd, it's so our podcast, isn't it? We're talking about Lynyrd Skynyrd. How many other people in the world are gathered together talking about Lynyrd Skynyrd? Anyway, Gary Rossington died, and he was the last surviving member of Lynyrd Skynyrd.
I was surprised at that.
I know. Well, actually, there was that terrible thing in 1977 where I think two of them and the backing singer were killed in a plane crash, weren't they?
Yeah.
But no, anyway, they seem relatively young, actually, obviously, because, but it made me think, which other groups now have absolutely no more original members? I know that there's no Crickets left. There's no Ramones.
Have all the Crickets gone?
All the Crickets have died. There are no Ramones. Elvis Presley's band are all dead. DJ Fontana, Scotty Moore, Bill Black. No Motorhead. The classic lineup, Fast Eddie Clarke and Filthy Animal Taylor and obviously Lemmy. There are no members of Jimi Hendrix Experience. I don't think there's any drifters left. It's very hard with groups like that to work out.
Well, yeah, it's very different.
You know, it's like the same with the
originals.
With the Coasters. I mean, I can't really work it out. I think one of the original members of the Coasters is still alive. Four Tops. There's still one member.
Duke Fakir. He's around. He wrote his autobiography not long ago, didn't he?
There are no members of Emerson, Lake and Powell alive. Carl Palmer is still alive, obviously.
Right, isn't it?
But Emerson, Lake and Powell, all dead. And there is only one member of Cream, and there's only one member of the Small Faces, I think. So, listeners, we are asking you
you'd be right.
to let us know. Is that right?
Yeah, we'll be right about Small Faces.
Are there any other groups?
I was amazed to reflect that the Shadows are, most of the Shadows are still with us.
I think maybe three of them are.
Three of the kind of original, hit-making band. Well, and not quite. Yeah, it depends how far back you go. But Hank Marvin, Bruce Welch, and Brian Bennett, the drummer, are still with us, which is amazing. Of course, you tend to think of the Shadows as belonging to a different generation from the beat groups of the 60s. Because they had hits, 3 or 4 years before the beat groups of the 60s. Yeah. Because they weren't different generations at all. The Shadows came down to London from, I think, Stockton-on-Tees, which is where Hank Marvin and Bruce Welch came from. They came down to London to make their fortune pretty much when they were 16. They packed their guitars, got on the train. They got cheap rail travel because their fathers both worked on the railways, as everybody did on Stockton-on-Tees, and came down to make their fortune and lived in theatrical digs in Finsbury Park. It's just absolutely extraordinary. If you think, if 16-year-olds were setting off to London nowadays to make their fortune, you'd think, shouldn't we call the social services?
I know. It seems absolutely incredible, doesn't it?
It does. We were just
talking to Mick Houghton, who's the author of a book about Andrew Lauder. And Andrew Lauder, at the age of 16, lived up in Northumberland, and he said
Andrew Lauder is the legendary A&R man who signed Dr. Feelgood and Mann and Hawkwind and all kinds of people.
And he said to his parents, look, at age 16, he said, actually his mother said to him, look, one of your friends, I was in a shop the other day and one of your friends said he was going to go down to London.
He's got a job at the Savoy. No, he's got a job. He's got a job. Why don't you go with him?
When you go with him, so he goes there with nowhere to live. It's absolutely fantastic. And what he decided to do is just to go to the New Musical Express, the Record Mirror, and the Melody Maker, just walk in and say, have you got any jobs? And so he went to the first two, and they were there. The enemy, I think, had moved, and so he finished up in Denmark Street, went into a music publisher's in Denmark Street, and just said, have you got any jobs? And they said, well, what can you do?
They said, how do you know, pretty much?
Yeah, how do you know? And he said, well, I just wondered. He said, well, actually, we have, and we need someone to do a bit of indexing or whatever it was, a bit of clerical work. And he started that, either that afternoon or the next morning or whatever, started his entire career, just literally by going in and knocking on the door.
Absolutely.
Saying, have you got any jobs? It's fantastic, really.
Yeah, university's got a lot to answer for, really.
It has.
Delaying the point in life where people, feel capable of launching themselves into the world, Whereas in those days, you just set off when you were 16. Absolutely extraordinary.
God, I remember that when I was at Smash Hits meeting our new publisher, a guy, an old mate of ours called Tom Maloney. And discovering that he was about 5 years younger than me when I was the editor. He was the managing director of the company.
Yeah,
I think, how did that happen?
He hadn't been arsing about at college.
He hadn't been arsing about. He left school at 16. He was a publisher when he was 19. I think he was the MD when he was 22. I thought, that is unbelievable. I don't think I'd even start. I hadn't got a proper job when I was 22. I just got out of college. Unbelievable.
Yeah. Did you see the story about LPs actually outselling CDs in the USA last year?
No, I've not seen that. No.
It's a kind of story. There's been kind of false alarms on this story for years, because the thing that always goes on is they always say, "Oh, they've outsold CDs for years." And no, they haven't at all. It's just they've been counting value. They've been counting the money spent rather than the units. Whereas in the United States in the last year, LPs in units terms sold more than CDs. Not in the UK, but they did in the US. And so that's, it's obviously being, greeted with kind of hosannas in the press as if it meant anything. I don't know what it means at all. The thing I worry about is that people will no longer consider it worthwhile to produce CDs. And I can't see records ever replacing CDs as a standard unit of physical product. You know what I mean? Because
LPs are just too cumbersome and complicated, and
Well, I can understand why people like them. It's very interesting. I was reading a thing the other day I was writing something about the kind of the advent of Napster and so forth, and it was 1999, I think, and before that, the record companies are starting to realize 1996 that music will eventually be something that travels down phone lines. At some distant point in the future, they probably thought it was going to be, but anyway, it's going to travel down phone lines. And many of them were reflecting, whoopee, well, this will be great because we won't have to deal with all that cumbersome packaging and so forth. We don't have to deal with the physical nature of the product. We'll just be dealing with music, plain and simple. And it's quite interesting that, because if you follow that through, you think to yourself, how many big legendary musical acts have come along since the advent of streaming being the main means of people getting things? How much of people's affection for the business of records is to do with owning a physical product?
It is going and buying it and taking it home, and it's mine. This is my copy.
Yeah. But it's also, I think, record store days coming around again, isn't it? And
so when are you saying that era ended and the sort of streaming, solely streaming?
It's sort of 21st century, isn't it? Really,
yeah.
And it's just the reverence accorded to the earlier stuff grows all the time. It seems to me, because it's just distant.
Yeah,
and so what you have This is my off the top of my head analysis, Mark.
Yeah,
okay, take it for what you will. Okay, most people are quite happy streaming music and don't need to own it or anything. They're not bothered about it. They just like the idea that you know, it's like turning on a tap. You can listen to anything you want, and when they don't want to listen to it anymore, they won't. And then you've got some people who won't want to own, and they prefer the CD because they just got used to the CD and so forth. And it served them really well. And then when you've got this subculture of people, and what they really like about the LP is the inconvenience of the thing.
Completely.
They love the inconvenience.
There's lots of people who I follow on Twitter, actually, people like that, and it's all about the ceremony. They're sat there, usually at about 6 o'clock every night. There's a little thing, Danny Baker's a really good example here. There's a little thing saying, record now playing. And it's the idea that they've sat down, they've carved out this bit of time, then maybe there's somebody else in there. Probably not, probably just them and a glass of red wine. But that's the whole thing. And they're sitting there looking at the sleeve.
But it's also, and this is an interesting example of how the old and the new work together in really unpredictable ways. I think it's hugely to do with social media. I think it's hugely to do with saying, look what I've got.
It's showing off, isn't it?
And my daughters always say to me, if you want to know why people go to Glastonbury, Instagram.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, they do. I'm having more fun than you.
I can look like Kate Moss. I've got the same green wellies and so forth.
Same puffer jacket, exactly.
and I'm having amazing
shorts.
And I've paid 350 quid or whatever it is for the privilege. And so it's intriguing to me how the very inconvenience that we seem to be waving goodbye to with the advent of downloads and streaming has been actively embraced by, a lot of people, undoubtedly a lot of people.
Absolutely.
Who spend more money than probably anybody's ever spent in the history of the record business in buying stuff. They just like it. That they like the inconvenience. That's my point, really. That's, everything else seems too easy, really.
But have you ever seen anybody post a thing saying, this is the CD I'm listening to? Because I don't think I have.
It doesn't work.
It's weird because
I've done it occasionally because it just doesn't work.
It doesn't work. It could be the same record as the vinyl version, but nobody cares.
Well, the CD. Well, okay. If you show an LP, you're not just advertising, Jefferson Airplane's Volunteers or whatever, plucking your record out the ether. You're also advertising your association with the past.
Yeah.
And when things
it's the idea you've had it a long time.
When things were proper.
Yeah.
When it was all fields
old
around
world.
Here.
All fields.
it's old world, And a CD is just well, you could have bought it yesterday and your copy looks the same as everybody else's, which does. Yeah. Fair enough. And the CD will never have any, I think they call it materiality. Whereas the record does. And of course, another thing I read today is that the cassette's coming back. People are gonna make compilations for their nearest and dearest. And
I find that hard to believe, actually, because the problem with the cassette was it's a liability. You'd spend ages making a cassette and then give it to somebody. Within 2 weeks, it's bust. It's got tangled. It's got eaten up by the dashboard of your car.
What I always found
playing in your car because there are no cassette players anymore.
What I always found about doing cassette compilations, not that I ever did a lot, I know some people who did them all the time, is that you start off and it's like a fantasy radio program you're doing. You got a punchy opener, punchy follow up, something different.
And you curl up your toes with delight at the pace of it all. And what we need now is a ballad. Yeah,
halfway through. And this particularly applies if drink has been taken, which it very often has. Yes. It's very often a thing that people will do on a Friday night or whatever. And they'll disappear to the little den with a bottle of red a large glass. And halfway through the second side of the tape, as it would have been in those days, they think, I know what I'll put on here. I'll put on some really long, zany, cutting-edge track.
Because that's what I'm in the mood for, because I'm pissed. That's right. You're forgetting someone else. The person you're making this for would hate this. You know?
And then halfway through, you think, oh, what do I do that for? But you're committed then, aren't you? You just do it, and you're scuppered, you know. But anyway.
It's wrecked the rhythm of it.
Absolutely. So that's the LP, the CD, and the cassette all dealt with.
You're listening to the Word Podcast, where the time is whenever you want it to be.
I'm grateful to Andrew Slattery. I sound like Cyril Fletcher on That's Life. He used to say, I'm very grateful to Mrs. Hinge from Stockton-on-Tees. Anyway, I'm grateful to Andrew Slattery for following up on, we were talking about Wayne Shorter last week, and I was saying how on all Weather Report album covers, they would always have Joe Zawinul, who was a keyboard player, would always list all the keyboards he played, and then afterwards Wayne Shorter would just say saxophone. And so I don't know if Andrew just made this up or whatever, or he found it on an album cover, but it goes like this. Joe Zawinul, Rhodes electric piano, Yamaha grand piano, Oberheim polyphonic synthesizer, melodica, guitar, tabla, modified Rhodes 88 electric piano, acoustic piano, ARP 2600 synthesizers, sequential circuits, Prophet 5 synthesizer, Neutron biphase, and Neutron volume wah effects, kalimba, Thumbeki drums, sleigh bells, hi-hat, keyboards, ARP quadra synthesizer bass, Korg vocoder VC10, Tonto synthesizer, clay drum computer, tambora, tack piano, percussion, organ, steel drum, oud, mzra, West African talking drum, xylophone, cymbals, and vocals. Wayne Shorter, saxophones.
It's really good. I mean, I couldn't help but think that he must be doing that. There must be some kind of sponsorship arrangement there where he's trying to get as many people in. But that's very cool. I know what you're saxophones. Not even singing.
I just love the idea of the way he says, that's all I need. Thank you very much.
No, thanks.
You can have all this tackle. You know, Alex Golds always says that the things that musicians care about more than music. Well, he's always very interesting on the subject of the things that musicians care about. He always says food is one of the things that they care about mostly. Touring musicians always care about food. But the other thing he said to me...
I've got a theory about touring musicians and food.
Oh, go on.
Which is that if you travel with bands and you give them food, they tend to just eat absolutely vast amounts because they don't know when the next meal is coming. They just don't know. I mean, okay, so it's 12 o'clock, we might as well eat because we might be in a van. There might not be time before we go on to next. So they always eat absolutely enormous meals. They'll be eating enormous meals at 4 a.m. because I may not eat again for another 24 hours. Bizarre.
So food is one thing that musicians are obsessed with. But the other thing that Alex told me this years ago, and it's made a big impression on me, I've thought about it a lot. What they like more than anything else in the world is equipment.
Yeah.
They're like toys. And they always think they're like golfers. Golfers they're one club away from perfection.
Yeah. That's if I just had the right piece of kit.
There's a new glove, whatever it is, that's going to make me as good as Rory McIlroy.
Yeah.
And musicians
and the golf merchandise and equipment industry is based on that very thing.
It's
the same, actually.
Testament to that very fact.
It is.
And but Wayne Shorter was not like that at all. Wayne just needed his saxophone. That would do him fine. Anyway, we've been reading this really interesting thing. It's one of those things that probably better on a web page than it would have been in a magazine, but it's a good idea for a feature.
It also has the most fantastic headline, doesn't it? Genuinely good headline. The headline is 50 genuinely horrible albums by brilliant artists.
It's a good idea.
I think that's a really good headline. It's a pretty good idea for a feature.
This is Rolling Stone by
genuinely horrible and by brilliant artists. It's just so well done, isn't it? Because their theory is that everybody that you really like, not everybody actually, but most acts that you really like at some stage have made a record that has absolutely no redeeming qualities whatsoever. And there's a variety of different reasons for that, aren't there?
I'm just going to read a few. I'm just got number 50 in front of me is It's Hard by The Who. Came out in 1982.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever heard it, but I'm perfectly prepared to believe that it's an absolute stinker.
Yeah, a lot of these I hadn't heard actually because they're so bad you hadn't heard.
Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't know they existed.
They've kind of crawled away into a corner. Excuse me. Billy Joel, The Bridge. Van Halen 3. The Grateful Dead, Built to Last. It goes on like that. And I think the worst is it Kanye West album?
Kanye West, I had never heard, yeah. But no, they made a really good point. They said there is no genius without a touch of madness. Because I thought, multi-album deals were a lot of part of it. The 80s too, a lot of those records in the 80s.
A lot of them.
So much money, but Billy Joel's The Bridge, Aerosmith's 9 Lives, Carole King's Speed. The 80s somehow legitimized. So many records were sold that people took their eye off the ball and just put out whatever. But my feeling is that there were lots of reasons for it. Some is just groups that just run out of steam.
Yeah.
The Stones, Emotional Rescue and Steel Wheels. Terrible records. REM's Around the Sun, which I remember hearing, actually, Peter Buck said it sounds like what it is. A bunch of people are so bored with the material, they can't stand it anymore. Because those were people just run out of steam. Bill Berry had left, they kind of lost their mojo, hadn't they? Summer in Paradise by the Beach Boys, which is nearly all kind of Mike Love.
Terrible.
Yeah. The Hunter by Blondie, I can remember that being really terrible. The Dead album you were talking about, Built to Last, had 4 songs with Brent Midland, the keyboard player, singing. Dylan, they mentioned Not Downloaded, which Not Downloaded actually had Brownsville Girl in it. They mentioned Down in the Groove.
Down in the Groove. And I think they're absolutely right. That is a terrible record.
Well, he has collaborations with the Grateful Dead lyricist Robert Hunter, which is Bob Dylan collaborating with a lyricist.
Yes.
But I think there's one that's even worse, which is Saved. Do you know Saved?
No.
Oh, my Lord, it's terrible.
No. I will not have that said.
Oh, no, it's rock.
No.
Turgid old kind of
give me the track.
Rock.
Give me the tracks on Saved. Read out the track.
Oh, no, they're terrible. They are A Satisfied Mind, Saved, Covenant Woman. Dave, that's a rotten song.
Okay, carry on.
What Can I Do For You? Solid Rock.
Solid Rock's brilliant. Solid Rock is produced by Bumps Blackwell. It's fantastic.
Okay. I wasn't sure, actually. Pressing on In the Garden, Saving Grace, and Are You Ready? I thought it was.
Okay. It's got one good track.
And this,
which is more than Give Us a year
after
in the Groove.
That's true. A year after Slow Train Coming, which has fantastic tracks on it,
I tell you what, I take issue with their choice of Cut the Crap by The Clash has been a terrible record. I don't think I've ever heard the whole LP, but that's
just after they'd fired 2 members.
It's got This Is England on it, which I think is one of the best things the Clash ever did. I think it's absolutely brilliant. And
they pick on a few which I think would fall into an unwise artistic venture category. John and Yoko's Two Virgins is a truly awful. Which is unlistenable. Inaudible spoken dialogue. The Kinks present a soap opera. I can remember hearing that. It's got bits of spoken word, isn't it, between, I think, in the tracks. As has Psycho Derelict by Pete Townsend. Remember that?
Yeah.
Rock opera about rock star who's turned into an alcoholic recluse. And they mentioned Gone Troppo and Dog Eat Dog, which I thought was quite good. Dog Eat Dog by Joni Mitchell, Gone Troppo, the George Harrison record. Both trying very hard to get into the kind of fashionable synthesizer pop sound of the time and failing dismally. But the one that I thought you couldn't argue with was Van Morrison's Stop Bitching, Do Something, which is that absolutely terrible record that he made. Do you remember 28 songs, 2 discs, the titles like Why Are You on Facebook? They own the media. Please. That's not going to be very thrilling, is it?
I think I was interested to see the ones included which were records that I'd kind of forgotten about, because this happens nowadays. The bands stay together so long that there will be very often whole decades that you just kind of missed.
Yeah.
You weren't looking at them. And so in 1995, Fleetwood Mac put out Time, which is when they had no Lindsey Buckingham and no Stevie Nicks. And so they brought in Becca Bramlett, who was the daughter of Delaney and Bonnie Bramlett, to take on the Stevie Nicks role. And I think Christina McVie's there as well, but it's apparently a really terrible record. And I was reading an interview, oddly enough, with Becca Bramlett only the other day. Long interview talking about her whole career, which is quite something. And she was reflecting on this record, and she said, I realized very soon after I started, I was only being brought in to get Stevie back.
Oh no!
Yes.
Oh,
it was like a boyfriend, come and be my girlfriend in order to
make her jealous. That's right. Yeah.
Make the last one jealous.
Sad. She's sort of bait. Oh, that's terrible.
So you got your name on a Fleetwood Mac album, and you probably got the odd co-write credit on it, but you happen to have your name on the only Fleetwood Mac record that didn't sell.
Nobody bought.
Nobody bought at all. And so, they started touring with her, and they barely started when Stevie Nicks said, "Okay, I give in. I'll come back."
Old job back.
So it's
a fantastic feature. It's such a good idea, I think.
It's a very good idea.
And there are groups who just haven't been together long enough to make a genuinely bad album. But if they did, if they were together long enough, they probably would. The Blurs and the Pulps, and they're all the more recent.
Oh
groups.
God, yeah.
But everybody at some stage does.
So did you see it? Did you see a story about the stolen records and the Northern Soul DJ?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
This is on the BBC website, that a collection of irreplaceable singles have been stolen from the home of a popular Northern Soul DJ. This is on the BBC website. Ted Massey said burglars broke into his Birmingham home while he was there, Mark.
Yeah, he was, I know.
Demanding he hand over the records he'd played during a set.
He played a gig that day, hadn't he? Isn't that right? In Nottingham, I think. And what he's saying is the records they stole, he said, were worth between 150 and 250,000 pounds. He said there were 250 singles, some of them worth 10,000 pounds each, but some were so rare there were only 6 copies in this country. So if you were the kind of person to be in the market for buying it, then you would be fully aware that it was a stolen copy. It's such a complicated, convoluted story.
It's not easy to sell stolen goods, Not that I've tried, but it's never
fencing
easy.
Northern Soul records.
It can't be easy.
No.
This is a bizarre story there, and this will send a shiver down the spine of anybody with a load of records, won't they?
Well, anybody with a load.
I thought there's the kind of thing that only happened to footballers in middle of the week when they're playing in a European tie, and their poor wives get
burgers. They know they're away.
Yeah, they know they're away. And they come in and...
But presumably, if you were a DJ and you're playing kind of rare psychedelic albums, you would dare hold up your Hapsash and the Coloured Coat record, or your rare Trees record, or your Tintin Abbey, or your
what do you think? If
the original Butcher sleeve by the Beatles, you wouldn't advertise the fact you owned that, because they'd follow you home.
What do you think if somebody turned up on your doorstep 11:30 at night? Obviously, the question of anybody getting any kind of criminal turning up on the doorstep.
Give me your white label version of Camembert Electric.
Yeah. What's the thing they ask for, Mark, at your house? I understand you've got a copy of National Lampoon's Radio Dinner. It's not really going to work.
All right, exactly. Take it. Just take everything you want.
Please take it.
Oh, Lord. That's unbelievable, isn't it?
The Word Podcast, walking the digital dog since 2007.
Any other business? We're joined by Alex Gold. Hello, Alex. How are you?
Hello. I'm very well. I'm currently floating on a large body of water somewhere in the Caribbean.
Sounds like an album title, that does, doesn't it? Floating on a large body of water somewhere in the Caribbean.
He is, in fact, working.
Quite a place to fair, I think.
He is, in fact, working. He is, in fact, once again playing the part of John Lennon in a Beatles tribute act on a cruise ship, which is,
Indeed.
So the rest of us suffering through the British winter, and he's somewhere in the Caribbean.
So, Alex, have you kept abreast of the Russell Brand story? Because Dave and I always used to think when Russell Brand first arrived, Dave and I I first thought he was quite entertaining, actually. But very soon, and this may not be unconnected to the thing involving Jonathan Ross, where they rang up Andrew Sachs and made some very unkind comments about Andrew Sachs's granddaughter. I never forgave him for that. But he's suddenly gone kind of off the boil, hasn't he? Completely.
Yeah, I really liked his comedy, and then when he started, when he ventured into becoming a bit of a shaman, I sort of lost interest a little bit, and now he's gone a bit further, hasn't he? He's gone a bit.
Just remind me for a second. Just come back here a bit. When was his comedy? I must have missed this.
Around 2010, he did a load of stand-up stuff.
What did he ever say that was funny? Was he?
He did stand up, and he had a memoir that was a huge seller on the back of it.
I understand
My Bookie Wook. That's right.
I understand he was a huge bestseller. Because loads of people really liked him. But I could never work out what was supposed to be funny about him. I just couldn't.
His clothes.
Yeah. I'd like the record to reflect that from day one, I thought he was a tosser.
And how right
that's fair enough. I think comedy is quite like music in the sense that you can't be told that someone is funny. You have to find the funny yourself.
Yeah, that's true.
If
the funny doesn't present itself, it never will, and that's fine. Totally
there was an amazing interview with him in 2013 when he was on Newsnight. He was interviewed by Jeremy Paxman because he's doing his whole thing about how people shouldn't vote. There's no point in voting in an election.
Oh,
Jeremy Paxman finished this interview saying one of the most damning things I've ever heard. There was a pause, and he said, "You really are a very trivial man."
Oh,
I thought that is unbelievable. And he tried to kind of get out of it. He was terribly camp, kept calling him Jeremy Darling and stuff like that, And I thought that really is damning. But now, of course, he's been associated with Donald Trump Jr., isn't he? And his podcast is put out by this kind of right wing kind of platform in America, and he's been slagging off Biden, Biden's chief of staff, and so everyone's thinking he's right wing, which they just weren't expecting.
No, but what do you think his greatest motivation is? To change the world or to be really famous?
To be really famous. I mean, he's
really famous.
He's one of those people I think is so desperate for attention that he has simply changed his political position from far left to far right.
And it's not too far a shift at all. You just pop out one door and pop in the next one.
Yeah.
I read this piece from, was it George Monbiot? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes, I read that this morning. It was really good.
It was actually, and the theory is that he's not drifted the far right, but he's positioned himself in front of the biggest audience on the planet. Yeah. And that's why.
He's got 6 million YouTube subscribers, so it's not like he's completely in any way on the slide. It's just that all the people who originally loved him feel mortified and let down that he's turned out.
So he's got 6 million YouTube subscribers. Yeah. Has he really? Okay. Yeah. How many have we got, Alex?
We've got 18,100 roughly.
And we're on our way.
And
that's not bad.
We're not far behind.
And snapping at his heels. If you want to join them, if you want to swell their ranks, please do so. And it's perfectly easy to do. There may be people worried that if they subscribe, in the words of that old Tom Waits song, no salesman will visit your door. It's nothing happens to you. It just means that it gets fed to you in your, so when you turn on YouTube, it's there alongside the other stuff that you happen to.
Yeah.
And so please do that. And if if you find yourself in a position to vote for this podcast anywhere or express your approval, please do that also, because it really matters, that kind of thing, doesn't it, Alex? It tweaks the algorithm, doesn't it, or something spooky like that?
It does. Every little helps.
Every little helps.
How are we some new patrons to
we have? Have we? Is that right, Alex? Go on.
We do. Shall we ring them in?
Go on.
Here we go. So, John Skilbeck.
John Skilbeck briefly played for Derby County, actually, in the late 1970s. He was a substitute goalkeeper, but he did come on. He did come on when Peter Shilton was injured.
Yeah. I thought he was some 1930s West Coast novelist, but anyway, no, you're.
Oh, that's quite good.
That was the other John Skilbeck.
It was.
It's
Go
a
on.
good name, John Skilbeck.
Yeah.
I hope the next one is equally, fruitful. Go on.
Paul Clark.
Paul Clark, is he came out of art school in Leicester in the mid '60s and came to London and started working in Carnaby Street.
Yes.
Where he eventually was responsible for designing a range of knitwear that went round the world, all with the Paul Clark logo.
Very good.
And he now lives on a private island just somewhere off the coast of New Zealand.
Next up, we have David Bostock.
David
God,
Bostock.
don't we know David Bostock? It can't be the same one. It could be.
It must be the same
David
one.
Scoffer Bostock was the. I'm saying that this is the original, one of the original designers of Smash Hits magazine. Well, appears in the clip that Dave and I were circulating only the other day. Where Sheila Rock photographs Martin Fry of ABC for the cover, playing a saxophone in the gold llama.
1982, is that right?
The picture is drawn up by Scoffer Bostock. It is, yeah, that's right. I'm sure that's the guy. David Bostock must be him. Let's say it's him. That's real.
Lovely to have you aboard.
Yeah.
Lovely to have you aboard. Go on.
Next up, we have Alan Colgan.
Colgan.
Oh, right.
Colgan.
Novelist?
Yep.
It could be, again, a novelist.
Yes. He's a forgotten winner of the Booker Prize from 1977.
Yeah.
Currently out of print, but, there is a groundswell suggesting it should be republished because people are very often discovering, the merits of Booker Prize winners.
And wrote one non-fiction title about Pete. Yeah. I think so, as opposed to coal or any
Very
other
good.
form.
Very good.
Yeah,
okay. Is that it, Alex?
It's not. We have more. The mysteriously monikered Fat Rattle.
Oh, my Lord. Wow. DJ, surely.
Yes.
Rattle?
Yeah, reggae DJ, I would have thought. He's the kind of the person whose name you would see on one of those posters that you see around London, advertising some extraordinary event taking place at Dalston Town Hall.
Yeah, posters usually attached to a sort of, a central reserve as your junction box. As you're turning onto a motorway. That's right.
Pasting it over a traffic light.
That's right. That's it.
Fat Rattle. Excellent. Very good.
And then we have three more. So we have Michael Williams and Philip Hopwood, who are both annual patrons.
Oh, well.
Annually.
Philip Hopwood's a cricketer.
15% off.
I think, isn't he?
Philip Hopwood. Yeah, he opens the bat in Kent.
I think he does.
Yeah, he
still does.
Yes, and sorry, the one you said before Philip Hopwood was Michael.
It was Michael Williams.
Michael Williams plays for Glamorgan, of course. He's a left arm spinner. He can be quite tricky. Michael Williams, right? Go on. And is that it?
And last but certainly not least, who is subscribing to the Clubhouse tier, which is our top tier. You get everything early, access to the quiz, your own birthday podcast.
Get your own special birthday podcast. It's a lot of fun. Really worth doing.
Yeah.
And also an invite to our biannual Word in Your Ear get-together as well.
Yeah, so there'll be another one coming up not long. Go on.
Indeed, is Bob Baird.
Bob Baird.
Bob
Baird is
broke a record for walking round the circumference of the United Kingdom in under 2 months. Is that the guy? Phil Walker did all the Monroes in a week and a half. Living solely on.
Indeed the guy. Yes,
that's
him,
the guy. That's the guy. Didn't he get an MBE?
Yeah, I think he did. Yeah, that's right. And eventually he finished up advertising Kendall mint cake, didn't he? Because that's what he lived on. That was almost entirely his diet for the entire trip. He did. Good man. Lovely to have him on board.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.